Hi, I'm Marin Still, and last month I got something I had been working toward for a long time. I am not going to say what it was, but I will say that the moment it arrived, I did not feel what I expected to feel. I did not feel proud. I did not feel accomplished. I did not feel like someone who had earned something. I felt like I was about to be caught. Not caught doing something wrong, just caught, exposed. Like someone was going to walk into the room at any moment and realize that whatever I had received had been given to the wrong person. That there had been some kind of mistake. That I was not actually what I appeared to be. And that everyone was about to find out. This feeling has a name. Psychologists call it imposter syndrome. And roughly 70% of people experience it at some point in their lives. Not the failing ones, the succeeding ones. It shows up specifically in the context of achievement. The more you accomplish, often, the louder it gets. Hi, I'm Marin Still, and what I am about to tell you is going to make you look at that feeling completely differently. Because imposter syndrome is not a flaw in your psychology. It is not low self-esteem. It is not something that needs to be fixed or treated or overcome through affirmations. It is your prehistoric nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. In a world where standing out too far from the group was one of the most dangerous things a human being could do. Stay with me. It gets weirder. Let's start with what imposter syndrome actually is, because the popular understanding gets it slightly wrong in a way that matters. The psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes at Georgia State University first described the phenomenon in a landmark 1978 paper. They were studying high-achieving women in academic settings and found a consistent pattern that surprised them. These were people with documented, verified, externally validated success. Degrees, publications, awards, recognition from peers, and yet they consistently described a private internal experience of feeling fraudulent, of believing their success was due to luck, timing, or some mistake that had not yet been discovered, of waiting, with genuine dread, for the moment when everyone would find out. Clance and Imes called it the imposter phenomenon. The word syndrome came later, and what they found was not just interesting psychologically, it was puzzling, because the people most affected were often the most objectively accomplished. The feeling did not track with actual competence. It tracked with visibility, with recognition, with the specific experience of being seen to have risen above the group. Now here is where the evolutionary story begins, because that specific trigger, not failure, but success, not invisibility, but recognition, points directly to a very old piece of human social machinery. The evolutionary psychologist Mark van Vugt at the Free University Amsterdam has argued extensively that the psychology of status, success, and social visibility in humans cannot be understood without reference to our evolutionary past in small-scale egalitarian bands. And what the archaeological and anthropological record shows about those bands is something that should reframe everything about how you experience achievement. In prehistoric egalitarian communities, the kind Christopher Boehm documented across his decades of research on hunter-gatherer societies, individual success was not celebrated the way our current culture celebrates it. It was monitored, it was managed, it was actively kept in check by a set of powerful social mechanisms designed specifically to prevent any one individual from accumulating so much status, resources, or influence that they threatened the equality of the group. Boehm called these leveling mechanisms, and they were not subtle. If someone became too successful at hunting, the community would publicly minimize their achievements. If someone began to accumulate more resources than others, social pressure would force redistribution. If someone showed signs of wanting power or special status, they would be mocked, criticized, and if the behavior continued, shunned. And if shunning failed, the ultimate consequence was exile, removal from the group entirely. In a world without agriculture, without stored food, without the ability to survive alone in the open, exile was functionally equivalent to a death sentence. We have been through this before, but here is the part that MS needs you to sit with in a new way. The consequence of standing out too far was not just social discomfort, it was potentially fatal. And your brain learned this. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the brains that survived were the ones that felt the warning signal before the group's response arrived. The ones that noticed their own increasing visibility and felt fear before the leveling mechanism activated. The feeling that preceded safety was not pride. It was the anxiety of being seen. The neuroscientist and social psychologist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, whose research on the social brain is some of the most cited in the field, has argued that the human brain's threat detection system treats social exclusion with the same neural machinery it uses for physical pain. Being cast out of the group activates the same regions of the brain, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, that fire when you stub your toe or burn your hand. Social rejection is not metaphorically painful, it is neurologically painful. The same circuitry, the same response. Which means the fear that arrives with visible success is not irrational, it is your threat detection system doing exactly what threat detection systems do. It has identified that you are becoming more visible, more prominent, more differentiated from the group, and it is sending you the signal it evolved to send. Be careful. Stay humble. Do not let them see you as too much. The social psychologist Jessica Tracy at the University of British Columbia, who has spent years researching pride and its social functions, found something that connects these threads in a particularly interesting way. She discovered that humans across cultures consistently distinguish between two kinds of pride. What she calls authentic pride, the warm, connected feeling of having done something well that you want to share with others, and hubristic pride, the puffed up, distancing, superiority signaling kind of pride that triggers leveling responses in observers. Authentic pride makes people like you more. Hubristic pride makes them want to cut you down. And the difference between the two, in terms of how they are perceived and responded to by groups, maps almost exactly onto the difference between the person who survives within the prehistoric band and the person who gets exiled from it. You can be successful. You cannot be visibly superior. The moment your success shades into a display of superiority, the leveling mechanism activates. Imposter syndrome, in this framework, is not a failure state. It is a calibration mechanism. The anxiety you feel when you are recognized is your nervous system running a check. Am I still within the acceptable range? Am I being perceived as superior rather than simply successful? Is my visibility triggering the kind of response from the group that historically preceded exile? The fact that the modern world has changed the stakes, that you will not actually be exiled from your team for winning an award, does not update the ancient software. The feeling runs on prehistoric hardware. And prehistoric hardware does not have a patch for you live in a world where individual success is not a tribal threat. Now here is where the archaeological evidence becomes genuinely interesting. Because the leveling mechanism that Bohem documented is not just behavioral, it left physical traces. The bioarchaeologist Linda Fibiger at the University of Edinburgh, studying patterns of prehistoric violence, found that a disproportionate amount of interpersonal violence in prehistoric communities appears to have targeted individuals who had accumulated unusual amounts of resources or social differentiation. The evidence suggests that the social enforcement of equality was not always gentle. The mocking and shunning and exile that Bohem documented were the soft forms. When those failed, the physical consequences could be severe. Your anxiety about being seen as too successful is not neurotic. It is the inherited memory of what happened to the ones who were. And here is the modern slap. Because I want you to think about the specific shape of your imposter syndrome. Not the general feeling, but the specific triggers. Notice where it shows up. It probably does not show up when you fail. It shows up when you succeed, when you are praised publicly, when you are promoted, when you win something, when you are given more visibility than you are used to. That is not where a genuine imposter would feel anxiety. A genuine imposter would feel anxious about being found incompetent. You feel anxious about being found too capable, about being seen as having risen too far above the people around you, about standing out in a way that could, at some ancient register, trigger the response. The psychologist Basima Tufik at MIT Sloan School of Management published research in 2022, finding something that should reframe this entirely. She found that people who scored higher on imposter syndrome measures actually performed better in interpersonal tasks. They were rated as more collaborative, more socially attuned, more likable by the people around them. The anxiety about being seen as superior translated directly into behavior that made them less threatening to the group, which was, evolutionarily speaking, exactly the right response. The feeling is not failing you, it is keeping you connected, It is the ancient social intelligence running below the level of conscious choice, calibrating your presentation to the group's tolerance, managing your visibility so that your success does not register as a threat. You are not a fraud. You are a social primate with very accurate prehistoric instincts about what happens to the ones who let their success look like superiority. The hunter who came back with the biggest kill kept their eyes down and let the group decide how much to celebrate, not because they doubted the kill, because they understood the group. You got something you worked for. And somewhere below the achievement, a very old part of your brain is still standing in the band, checking the faces of the people around you, making sure you are still one of them. That is not weakness. That is the oldest form of social intelligence we have. Hi, I'm Marin Still, and now you can never unknow this.